Hey boys and girls, our book of the day today is called The Polar Express, and this is one of my favorite Christmas books. The Polar Express, written and illustrated by Chris von Allsburg. So Chris von Allsburg wrote the words and drew the pictures. He is both the author and the illustrator. On Christmas Eve, many years ago, I lay quietly in my bed. I did not rustle the sheets. I breathed slowly and silently. I was listening for a sound a friend had told me I'd never hear, the ringing bells of Santa's sleigh. There is no Santa, my friend insisted, but I knew he was wrong. Late that night, I did hear sounds, though not of ringing bells. From outside came the sound of a hissing steam and squeaking metal. I looked through my window and saw a train standing perfectly still in front of my house. Have you ever seen a train in front of your house with no train tracks? I haven't. It was wrapped in an apron of steam. Snowflakes fell silently around it. A conductor stood and opened the door of one of the cars. He took a large pocket watch from his vest, then looked up at my window. I put on my slippers and robe. I tiptoed downstairs and out the door. "All aboard," the conductor cried out. I ran up to him. "Well," he said, "are you coming?" "Where?" I asked. "Why, the North Pole, of course," was his answer. "This is the Polar Express." I took his outstretched hand and he pulled me aboard. So the train is going to take them to the North Pole. The train was filled with other children, all in their pajamas and nightgowns. We sang Christmas carols and ate candies with nougat centers as white as snow. We drank hot chocolate as thick and rich as melted chocolate bars. Outside, the lights of towns and villages flickered in the distance as the Polar Express raced northward. Soon, there were no more lights to be seen. We traveled through cold, dark forests, where lean wolves roamed and white-tailed rabbits hid from our train as it thundered through the quiet wilderness. We climbed mountains so high it seemed as if we would scrape the moon, but the Polar Express never slowed down. Faster and faster we ran along, rolling over peaks through valleys like cars on a roller coaster. And if you can see, right up there is the Polar Express on the very top of that mountain. The mountains turned into hills, and the hills to snow-covered plains. We crossed a barren desert of ice, the Polar Express ice caps. Lights appeared in the distance. They looked like the lights of a strange ocean liner sailing on a frozen sea. "There," said the conductor, "is the North Pole." And those are the lights he's talking about. So that is the North Pole. The North Pole. It was a huge city standing alone on top of the world, filled with factories where every Christmas toy was made. At first, we saw no elves. "They are gathered in the center of the city," the conductor told us. "That is where Santa will give the first gift of Christmas." "Who receives the first gift?" we all asked. The conductor answered, "He will choose one of you." "Look," shouted out at the children, "the elves!" Outside we saw hundreds of elves. As our train grew closer to the center of the North Pole, we slowed to a crawl. So crowded were the streets with Santa's helpers. When the Polar Express could go no further, we stopped and the conductor led us outside. You see all of those elves in the center of the city? It takes a lot of elves to make all those Christmas presents. We passed through the crowd and to the edge of a large open circle. In front of us stood Santa's sleigh. The reindeer were excited. They pranced and paced, ringing their silver sleigh bells that hung from their harness. It was a magical sound like nothing I had ever heard. Across the circle, the elves moved apart and Santa Claus appeared. The elves cheered wildly. He marched over to us and pointed to me and said, "Let's have this fellow here." He jumped into the sleigh. The conductor handed me up. I sat on Santa's knee and he asked, "Now, what would you like for Christmas?" I know that I could have any gift I could imagine, but the thing I wanted most for Christmas was not inside Santa's giant bag. What I wanted more than anything was one silver bell from Santa's sleigh. When I asked, Santa smiled. He gave me a hug and told an elf to cut a bell from the reindeer's harness. The elf tossed it up to Santa. He stood, holding the bell high above him, and called out, "The first gift of Christmas!" And if you could see, he's got the bell in his hand. A clock struck midnight, and the elves roared their approval. Santa handed the bell to me, and I put it in my bathrobe pocket. The conductor helped me down the sleigh. Santa shouted out the reindeers' names and cracked his whip. The team charged forward and climbed into the air. Santa circled once above us, then disappeared in the cold, dark polar sky. As soon as we were back inside the Polar Express, the other children asked to see my bell. I reached into my pocket, but the only thing I felt was a hole. I had lost the silver bell from Santa's sleigh. "Let's hurry outside and look for it," one of the children said. But the train gave a sudden lurch and started moving forward. We were on our way home. How does he look? He looks sad because he lost his bell. He is not a happy kid right now. It broke my heart to lose the bell. When the train reached my house, I sadly left the other children. I stood at my doorway and waved goodbye. The conductor said something from the moving train, but I couldn't hear him. "What?" I yelled out. He cupped his hands around his mouth. "Merry Christmas!" he shouted. The Polar Express let out a loud blast from the whistle and sped away. On Christmas morning, my little sister Sarah and I opened our presents. When it looked as if everything had been unwrapped, Sarah found one last small box behind the tree. It had my name on it. Inside was the silver bell. There was a note. "Found this on the seat of my sleigh. Fix that hole in your pocket. Signed, Mr. C." I shook the bell. It made the most beautiful sound my sister and I had ever heard. But my mother said, "Oh, that's too bad." "Yes," said my father, "it's broken." When I'd shaken the bell, my parents had not heard the sound. At one time, most of my friends could hear the bell, but as the years passed, it fell silent for all of them. Even Sarah found one Christmas that she could no longer hear its sweet sound. Though I've grown old, the bell still rings for me as it does for all who truly believe. And there is the bell.